I adjusted the napkin on my lap for the third time, though it was purely habit. My silk blouse already felt impossibly smooth against my skin, catching the golden glow of the chandelier above. The familiar hum of conversation at my parents' dining table was like background music I didn't want to hear, yet somehow couldn't ignore. I'd always been the quiet one, the composed one, the girl who smiled politely while keeping her truths tucked neatly away. Tonight was supposed to be simple, a family dinner, a few laughs, and maybe a toast to my younger brother, Ryan, whose life seemed, at first glance, as uncomplicated as ever. But then my phone buzzed, an unexpected message lighting up the screen, making my chest tighten. I glimpsed it discreetly, a small smirk forming despite the flutter of nerves. Ryan had just texted me from the dining room. Big announcement tonight. Brace yourself. I felt the familiar tug of anticipation mixed with irritation. He had always been dramatic, the spotlight magnet of the family, the one who could casually toss a bombshell while keeping everyone stunned into silence. My heart thumped with a cocktail of dread and curiosity. Would tonight's surprise be harmless bragging, or something that demanded I confront parts of our past I'd worked hard to leave behind? I took a slow sip of my water, letting the crisp chill settle my nerves. Outside the window, the city lights glittered like tiny promises I had chased and kept hidden from this table. The moment felt delicate, charged, and unknowingly poised for a revelation that would change everything. I remember the day I decided I couldn't stay invisible anymore, the sting of my mother's words still sharp in my memory. I was 19, barely out of high school, and filled with a mix of hope and fear that made my hands tremble. "You'll never make it on your own," she had said, her voice sharp but careless, as if dismissing a fly. My father didn't speak, but his silence carried the same weight. And Ryan, my younger brother by 2 years, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, smirking, as though my ambitions were a private joke. I remember gripping the small, leather-bound journal my grandmother had given me just before I left for college. "Write your truth, Emily," she said, pressing it into my hands. "Even if no one believes in you, you must." I clutched it to my chest, feeling the textured cover under my fingers, the faint scent of her lavender perfume lingering on its pages. That gift became a talisman of sorts, a secret promise that my dreams weren't trivial. Walking out of that house for the first time without looking back was nothing short of terrifying. My chest tightened with each step, my throat burning as I swallowed the lump of doubt. Every good luck from neighbors felt like a whisper of hope, but it wasn't until I crossed the city line that I allowed myself to breathe freely, to imagine a life where I was not defined by the narrow expectations of those I loved. I spent nights lying awake in my tiny apartment, my journal open, writing down my plans, my fears, the whispers of ambition that no one at home had wanted to hear. I made mistakes, countless mistakes, but each one carried me closer to the version of myself I could finally respect. Slowly, I began building a life that belonged only to me, one where my voice mattered, one where success wasn't just a word tossed around at dinner tables. And somewhere deep inside, I carried a quiet, stubborn defiance, my unspoken message to the family who doubted me. I will not just survive. I will rise. The first year out of college was brutal. I worked 3 jobs at once, each one teaching me lessons I hadn't anticipated. Lessons about resilience, about the quiet dignity in earning your own way, and about trusting your instincts when no one else does. My tiny studio apartment smelled perpetually of coffee and late-night determination. The city never slept, and neither did I, not fully. Every ding of my phone, every email notification, was a pulse of possibility I clung to like a lifeline. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I met Margaret, a seasoned entrepreneur with a reputation for spotting raw talent. She walked into the coffee shop I was managing and immediately saw more than the girl balancing trays and schedules. "You're too sharp to be invisible," she said, her eyes piercing yet kind. She became my mentor, guiding me through the labyrinth of business strategies, contracts, and the subtle art of negotiation. Margaret didn't sugarcoat the truth. She pushed me to stretch, to risk, to step into rooms where I wasn't invited yet. The early wins were small but exhilarating. My first freelance design client paid me enough to cover rent and food, and more importantly, validated that I could create value independently. The first time I signed a contract in my name, I felt a thrill that no family acknowledgement could match. I began saving, investing, and quietly growing a portfolio of work that would, one day, speak louder than anyone's doubts. The secret of my success became a part of me. I posted only vague updates on social media, sharing photos of city streets or coffee mugs, never the actual milestones. I wanted my family to see me, someday, without any illusions. They would witness my achievements, unembellished, undeniable. Each night, I returned to my journal, jotting notes about triumphs, setbacks, and the quiet victories that no one else could measure. The pages were a testament to the person I was becoming, strong, resourceful, and fiercely independent. Even when exhaustion clawed at me, I reminded myself of my grandmother's words, "Write your truth, Emily." It wasn't just a journal anymore. It was a compass pointing to the life I had meticulously built in secret. Slowly, opportunities multiplied. A client referral led to another, and before I knew it, I was managing projects that once would have felt impossible. I began to understand the rhythm of success, the combination of persistence, intelligence, and subtle strategy. By the time I looked back, I had transformed from the quiet girl who left home in fear and doubt into a woman whose presence demanded attention, whose work carried weight, whose life no longer relied on the validation of others. And yet, the secret remained, until tonight. The aroma of roasted chicken and warm bread filled the dining room as the family chattered, oblivious to the storm quietly building in the corner of my mind. Ryan, in his usual smirk, was halfway through a story about a coworker's embarrassing mishap when he paused, turning toward me. "So, I have news," he said, voice tinged with his signature dramatic flair. "I'm moving in. Thought it'd be fun to crash at your place for a while." The room froze, my parents' eyebrows arched, their forks suspended midair. I sipped my water slowly, the cool liquid steadying my racing thoughts. A surge of anticipation coursed through me. Tonight was the night. My secret wasn't just a hidden achievement anymore. It was about to shift the entire dynamic of this room. After a deliberate pause, I stood, letting my silk blouse whisper against my skin, and invited them to come see my apartment. Curiosity and surprise painted their expressions as we exited the familiar confines of the family home. The city streets stretched before them, bustling yet subdued in the night, while I led the way up to my penthouse apartment, a sanctuary of my own design. The door swung open to a space that breathed sophistication, rich, textured walls adorned with contemporary art I had collected over the years, a sleek glass desk stacked neatly with contracts and portfolios, and floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city's skyline ablaze with light. Every detail whispered independence, the elegant lighting, the subtle fragrance of jasmine, the faint hum of classical music in the background. They paused, absorbing everything. I could almost hear their thoughts. "Is this really Emily?" I gestured toward the modern office corner. "This is where I work." "And these," I said, pointing to framed client contracts and project awards, "are the milestones I've earned, without loans, without favors, without anyone holding me back." My parents' eyes widened, disbelief etched across their faces. Ryan's jaw dropped. He looked like a kid caught in a lie he hadn't yet told. You did all this?" my mother whispered, voice tight with a mix of awe and guilt. I smiled gently, letting the weight of my accomplishments speak before I added, "Yes, every single step. And just to be clear, I didn't do it to impress anyone here. I did it because I believed in myself when no one else did." Ryan opened his mouth, stammering, searching for words. I could see the slow dawning of recognition, the realization that the sister he had always underestimated had become a force entirely her own. Their silence filled the room like a tangible presence, and in that pause, I knew the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside, mingling with the quickening heartbeat I felt in my chest. This was more than a reveal. It was a statement, a reclaiming of identity that had been dismissed for years. And tonight, they weren't just witnessing my success, they were finally seeing me. The silence in the apartment was heavy, charged with the realization that the family dynamics they'd always assumed were permanent had just been rewritten. I leaned against the edge of my desk, letting the quiet settle before I spoke. "I'm happy to help," I began, my voice calm but firm. "But this time, it comes with conditions. I won't repeat the same patterns I endured for years." My parents exchanged nervous glances, while Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to the idea that I could set boundaries. "First," I said, locking eyes with each of them in turn, "I want honesty. No more excuses, no more hiding behind blame or old habits. If you want to be part of my life, you'll show up fully, authentically, without judgment or manipulation." I moved toward the small bookshelf lining the wall, fingers brushing the spines of my journals, a physical reminder of my journey. "Second," I continued, "I expect effort toward personal growth. Each of you has dreams, ambitions that I've seen you sideline. I'll help, but only if you commit to pursuing them seriously. Ryan, that includes finding stability in your career and learning the value of responsibility." My father's throat tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "And what about forgiveness?" he asked quietly. I smiled softly, a mixture of compassion and resolve. "Forgiveness isn't automatic. It's earned through change. I care about you, but I won't bend to old patterns. I've spent too long proving myself alone to repeat that cycle." Turning back to Ryan, I added, "And for you, little brother, this isn't a free ride. You're welcome here if you respect boundaries, acknowledge the effort it took for me to build this life, and take responsibility for your choices. I'll support you, but only in ways that empower you, not enable old habits." Their expressions shifted, fear, shame, hope, and tentative understanding mingling on each face. I could see it in their eyes. They realized this wasn't about punishment or pride. It was about recalibration, a chance to rebuild with respect and mutual accountability. Finally, I gestured to the city lights outside my windows. "This is a new chapter," I said softly. "One where we can be a family without repeating the mistakes of the past. But the rules are simple: honesty, effort, growth, and respect. If we commit to that, we can thrive together." For the first time in years, I felt the tension lift slightly, replaced by a quiet, deliberate power. The shift wasn't about dominance, it was about integrity, self-respect, and reclaiming the authority over my own life. I realized I could love them, help them, even forgive them, but only on terms that preserved my boundaries and celebrated the woman I had become. This was my life, my rules. My family's participation was conditional, not optional, and for the first time they understood. Weeks passed after that night, and the change in the household was palpable. Ryan started taking his responsibilities seriously. He enrolled in a professional course and even began contributing to the rent. My parents, slowly shedding the weight of guilt, began to speak more openly, to listen without judgment, and to acknowledge the boundaries I had set. The tension that had once defined family dinners dissolved into something new, cautious respect, threaded with hope. I often caught myself smiling quietly as I observed them navigating this shift. It wasn't perfect. Old habits resurfaced at times, but the effort mattered more than the occasional misstep. I realized that real change isn't instantaneous. It's incremental, a series of small but meaningful actions that slowly transform the relationship landscape. And in guiding them, I also acknowledged the growth within myself, the woman who had endured doubt, dismissal, and underestimation, and emerged resilient, powerful, and unshakably independent. One evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing a successful project proposal, my fingers brushed the leather-bound journal my grandmother had given me years ago. The scent of lavender, faint but familiar, seemed to affirm everything I had accomplished. I opened it to a blank page, inhaled deeply, and whispered, "We did it. I did it." The journey had not just been about proving my worth to others. It had been about honoring my own potential, nurturing my dreams, and embracing the life I had fought for. I looked out at the city's skyline, glittering like countless tiny victories, and felt a profound sense of closure. The relationships I valued now were built on authenticity and mutual respect, not obligation or expectation. I had learned to love fiercely, but wisely, to give generously, but without sacrificing my boundaries. As I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf, a quiet confidence settled over me. I had turned a dinner table announcement into a catalyst for transformation, not just for my family, but for myself. The room, once heavy with expectation and doubt, now felt alive with possibility. And in that moment, I realized my final truth. I am the architect of my life, the keeper of my boundaries, and the author of my story. I had risen, not for recognition, not for approval, but for the undeniable power of my own choices. I smiled, whispered softly to myself, and knew it to be true. I am enough, and I always have been.